Hey, I'm Jason.
Hey, I'm AJ. You're here at Excel Physical Therapy with us again, doing another episode of our seasonal transitions with uphill pursuits. Today, we're going to focus on the winter season and a lot of that split boarding, backcountry skiing, skinning, outdoor recreation that we have coming up. Hopefully, getting you as psyched as we are for the upcoming season. So this is what we all long for, those bluebird days, some fresh snow, out with the dogs and some good friends, searching for some good, clean, fun turns and making sure we're safe and healthy while we're doing that. And that's what we're going to focus on this upcoming talk. Now, while this could be a good, accurate representation of the median home price here in Gallatin Valley, it's actually more depicting the popularity of the backcountry pursuits that we're having here in the valley, around the country. And with that comes a lot of wear and tear, a lot of access issues, a lot of increased knowledge, or just again a lot of energy spent in those arenas, whether it's researching stuff, getting out, getting after it, injuries that come with it, the gear and technologies. And what we really just want to do is be aware of all this increase in that trend and make sure we're doing our part, whatever it may be, to keep up with it and make sure we're doing it properly and safely and reasonably. So going along with that is the more you know, the better you are off. So a couple good resources to make sure you're staying in tune with and keeping up with as the snow begins to settle in and stick around is that avalanche forecast every morning. I know I personally look forward to it each and every morning in my inbox to make sure I'm understanding what's going on in the areas that I like to ski and backcountry recreate in. And also some good things to make sure you're looking into and researching, or at least taking advantage of, as our really good backcountry opportunity and education classes that we have here in the valley, whether it's through again a 6 Points avalanche education opportunities or the American Avalanche Institute, or I know MSU offers some great resources. The more you know about where you're going and how to be safe in those areas with the groups of people you're with, the better off you can prevent any big issue that you have coming up, and hopefully keep anything from needing to come see Jason and I, which is what we're going to begin to talk a little bit more on, is how to keep active and not have to come and visit us in the office and keep up with those recreational pursuits.
Absolutely. So yeah, there are a lot of great resources in our valley. We're really lucky to have that in terms of avalanche education. The Gallatin National Forest Avalanche Center does a great job, and then Eric Knopf at 6 Points, and then just really anything through American Avalanche Institute. Because, you know, while backcountry skiing and touring has really exploded, as that earlier graph showed, you know, up to 400% over the past few years. Unfortunately, so have backcountry-related injuries. And so with injuries, there actually is a pretty good discrepancy in gender with getting backcountry ski injuries. So men are much more likely to develop a backcountry skiing-related injury than women. So 70% of men versus 30% of women. And this may have something to do with, you know, just risk tolerance and risk behavior. And so, you know, in my mind, it's always good to have some females in the group. It kind of helps mellow the group out a little bit more. Not saying that, you know, women definitely charge and get after it, but usually they are definitely more of the voice of reason in the group. So it's always nice to have that in your group going forward. And with those injuries that are occurring in backcountry skiing and snowboarding, the vast majority of those injuries are occurring during the descent. So as you are alpine skiing, tele skiing, or snowboarding, coming down, you know, what you're really earning your turns for are when those injuries are occurring. So there's a threefold increase in injuries with the descent compared to the ascent. But uphill injuries or ascent injuries that occur on the ascent, you know, typically are occurring because of fatigue, and where, you know, that we as the rider or the tourer are fatiguing beyond the capacity of our tissues to handle that, and then we have a breakdown in form, and that typically is going to result in back pain or hip pain with touring, again on the uphill portion of that. And these injuries are really overuse injuries, so they're not really traumatic in nature, and they occur gradually over time as, you know, you are probably exceeding your capacity to you know, maintain good form going uphill. There's multiple tissues both in the lower back and in the hip that can be causing the pain. So, you know, most often it's muscular in both the back and the hip, but it can be pain with structures that are deeper rooted as well. So it could be due to the disc in the lumbar spine, or to the joints in the lumbar spine. And same thing with hip pain too. It can be joint related pain, or what we call hip impingement, abbreviated by FAI. And this can sometimes occur with a degenerative labral tear of the hip as well. The good thing to know with all of these is they all respond typically very well to physical therapy. And I know AJ would concur with this, but if you're dealing with a pain that's preventing you from performing at the level that you want to perform at, it's best to get that treated and looked at sooner than later, because we can usually get you back out sooner than later, the earlier you come in with the injury. And so, dropping us a line at Excel Physical Therapy or to your local physical therapist or sports medicine doc is a good place to start. And so I typically say if it's not getting better after 2 weeks, you definitely should be getting in. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb. If after about 2 weeks, no change in symptoms, and it is limiting your ability to get out and perform and do the things you want to do, that's a good gut check to at least reach out to somebody who might have a little bit of an in-depth knowledge, whether it's a PT, a chiro, or whoever you trust that's helped you out in the past. Would be a good time to make sure we're taking those necessary steps before it's the full season we're out.
Yeah, ultimately what we want to do is keep you out of the healthcare system. So, how can we decrease developing that hip pain or back pain with skinning in the first place? So as Dudley Dewey would say, let's do it right. First, we want to work on mobility, and the piece of mobility in our body related to touring that is the one that we most often have to work on is that work on hip extension. So very similar to running. So here AJ is demonstrating a really nice hip extension drill or stretch to do. This is available on our YouTube site. So if you just go to our website, www.excelptmt.com, and then just click on our YouTube button, you have full access to all of these videos. So he has a voiceover with this to lead you through that. And then once you've gained some mobility through working on some stretching, you always want to follow that up with working on utilizing that mobility. So doing a little bit of strengthening afterwards. So here AJ's demonstrating a few drills for working on that hip extension. And this, again, is going to help prevent you from developing back pain or hip pain while skinning, but it also is really going to help improve your performance too and your technique. So really working on getting those hips behind you and with that glide, which we'll talk about here in a few moments in terms of technique and how to perform better with that. But again, some good options there. Just check it out on our YouTube channel. And AJ, does a great job with these videos. Also, what we can work on is strength. So I alluded to that a little bit earlier there with that last video, but really want to work on what we call the posterior chain. So the muscles on the back of the leg. So mainly our glutes and the muscles on the side of what are the glutes as well. So doing some core strength, working on spinal extensor strength as well. Here I'm demonstrating a modified side plank with really working on some glute strength, and then moving into a plank and a plank with some leg lifts ultimately, and then moving on to another side plank as well. And then really getting after it with really loading up those muscles to really make good changes with strength. So deadlifts are a great way to achieve that and strengthen the posterior chain, especially the glutes and the hamstrings, as well as the spinal extensors. So all things that typically are fatiguing while you're touring and can cause a breakdown in form. Deadlifts, of course, you really want to have great form with this, proper form with this. So if you're unfamiliar with that technique, go find some good instruction, at somewhere like the Mountain Project, or coming in here and getting some feedback from us. And then lastly, ways to decrease hip and back pain with skinning is really dialing in your technique. So, when we're touring, we're gliding. We always talk about going for a walk, but we're really gliding rather than walking. So you really want to focus on gliding your skis or your board forward and getting that hip extension. keeping your chest upright and avoiding collapsing through the spine. And a way to do this too is just keeping your poles in close to your body and close to your footprint, and really trying to minimize your time on the risers. So with this, it's really setting a good track. A lot of people tend to set their track a little too steep. We're really looking for optimum skin track of being somewhere between 12 and 15 degrees has been shown to be the most efficient. So you really shouldn't have to be in your risers the vast majority of the time as you're ascending. And you're going to be more efficient that way, as well as really minimize the chance of developing an overuse injury on the way up. But as I indicated earlier, the vast majority of injuries that are occurring in backcountry skiing and snowboarding are on the way down. And there can be lots of factors that are involved with this in terms of increased fatigue, having some underlying weakness, being maybe a little bit dehydrated, as well as some environmental factors in terms of what the snow conditions are and what your equipment is. But ultimately, it results in you falling while you're descending, and that results in trauma. So again, threefold increased risk of getting injured on the way down versus the way up. And the two areas of the body that are most often injured are the hand and wrist, or really the hand, and the knee. And so diving into a little bit more specifics with that, the hand injury is skier's thumb. And so that's where you're falling on a pole and with the pole in your hand, and that's actually tearing a ligament in your thumb that you're basically going to need a surgical reconstruction for. So this can happen, of course, anytime you have a pole in your hand. So it can happen on the way up too, and not just with skiers, but with snowboarders. Since in spitboarding we are using poles to ascend, so it's just something to be aware of. And a good way to avoid this is really just on how you're gripping the pole. So when you're if you're wearing your pole straps, coming underneath the strap to grab the pole, so that when you let go of the pole when you're falling, the pole drops outside of your palm, versus if you come from the top down to grab the pole, that's going to stay in your palm and then get your thumb and fulcrum your thumb, resulting in that injury. The main knee injury that's occurring in backcountry skiing and snowboarding, unfortunately, is the ACL, or anterior cruciate ligament, shown here in red. So the ACL is one of the main stabilizers of the knee. And when you tear it, unfortunately, it's really hard to maintain stability at the knee. So a lot of times that's going to end up in a season-ending injury with a subsequent surgery. And then spending a lot of time with AJ and I here, which we'd rather see you out on the hill.
There's better places to spend time with us.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you've lived in Bozeman for any length of time, you definitely know someone who's had an ACL injury and probably a reconstruction, and just how common they are with both skiing and snowboarding. And so with snowboarding, they typically have a much lower incidence of ACL injuries. But once we get up to that kind of expert advanced level snowboarder, the incidence of ACL tears is the same as in alpine skiing. And so ways to prevent those ACL tears are first just checking your equipment, especially for skiers, to make sure that your skis are going to release and that you don't get stuck with that big lever arm of the ski twisting your knee. And then what we'll cover today is really some proper strengthening and conditioning, making sure you're in good shape and having the muscles around the knee really strong, and then working on your technique with landing and falling, so that you learn how to fall properly and not put that stress on your knees. And before you even get out, maybe at the trailhead, getting a good dynamic warm-up has also been shown to prevent ACL injuries from occurring. So a good warm-up here, I'm demonstrating just a couple things. Is you want your warm-up to be dynamic, so where you're doing active movement through a range of motion that's similar to the sport that you're going to be participating in. So in this case, this is more of a spitboarding one, but can certainly work for skiing as well. And did some squats. Typically you want to do more than just a few there, but for the brevity of the video, just doing a few here. Then going into some single leg RDLs, or reverse deadlifts. You would want to do those on both legs, and then coming down into an overhead squat and working on some rotation. So we're getting the back and the torso warmed up as well. And then ending with a somersault, which is a good way for kind of warming everything up and working on some fall training. And you'd want to work through, multiple repetitions of this, ideally like about 10 of each of those exercises, and getting through that, 3 to 4 times, just to where you maybe even have a light sweat going before you start skiing or snowboarding or touring in this case. And then the big key is, as probably many of you are trying to do right now, is doing some preseason conditioning. So really getting after some strengthening. The quads and hamstrings are the muscle groups that are kind of the primary muscle groups that are working when we're both ascending and descending. And so we want to do workouts that really emphasize squat form and making sure that, our knee isn't necessarily caving in, where we have good stability at the knees with doing this. You could do this with either front squats or back squats, as demonstrated here. These days, it seems like everyone has made a home gym across the country. So it's really hard to find weights if you're trying to do things at home. So get creative and just load up some weights in your ski pack and use that for your weight. And, in terms of doing a front squat versus a back squat, whatever's more comfortable for you and feel like you're really getting good activation of the quads as well as the glutes coming down and not having any back pain with that. Also, deadlifts. We demonstrated deadlifts earlier on with kind of talking about preventing uphill injuries. Here's a way to do deadlifts if you don't have a barbell, is load up a pack, stand on a higher surface so you can get that hip hinge and lower the weight below your feet. This one here, the pack's probably a little bit too big. If I had a smaller pack, I'd be able to do more of a hip hinge, because you do want to get where you're feeling a stretch down your hamstrings with working on this. And then single leg deadlifts or RDLs are a great thing to work on. It really helps emphasize eccentric hamstring strength and focusing on balance at the same time. So this is a really great exercise for preventing ACL injuries or decreasing the risk of ACL injuries, and working on that strength with the hamstrings to help prevent your ACL from tearing. And then lastly, weighted step-ups are a great training tool, especially for backcountry skiing and snowboarding, really working on that up piece, as well as if you're going to be hiking the ridge. And again, really working on stability through the knee. So coming all the way up, locking the knee out, and then trying to slowly lower down without letting the knee bend in. Again, here using weight on your back with a pack, or if you're in the gym, using a barbell or a kettlebell. And then lastly, in terms of trying to perform better, and then I'll turn it over to AJ where he'll talk a little bit about it as well, is the cardio aspect. So, both of us love trail running, but we also really like mountain biking. I've been doing a lot of mountain biking this summer, probably not as much trail running, especially since there really haven't been too many races. And, I need to get back into right now to prepare for the season with getting a little bit more heavy on the trail running aspect of things. So that's going to be way more specific than biking for getting your cardio in shape, as well as just doing sport specific strengthening with running uphill for touring. And another great thing to do in terms of working on that, as well as working on your technique, is Nordic walking, bounding, or running. This is a common training tool that Nordic skiers are using, but this is a great training tool for backcountry skiers to be using as well. It is very technical, actually. And so we had Andy Newell from BSF, who's the head coach there and a 4-time Olympian, record a video on technique for Nordic walking, bounding, and running, and talking a little bit about the differences of that. If you'd like access to that video, just go to our webpage, our homepage, and then down on the right, there's a way you can register for our email, and then we'll send you that email from Andy. It's really informative and a great way to get started with doing some Nordic walking or bounding, which again is going to be great for your technique and performance for backcountry touring.
So last but not least, kind of improving on everything here is not only is it good to get strong for injury prevention, but stronger humans are just, a little bit more useful in life and nature. A good example of that is that guy here on the screen in the plaid shirt doing a box jump. Matt's down there being a good example for everything here, training, getting ready, getting going. And what I want to speak to more is not so much about the strength development, but it's taking that strength and being able to utilize it quick, or pretty much working on some plyometric jumping demands. That speed of strength or that rate of force development is what we're seeing more and more in the literature as a big predictor of injury, sports performance, and also just ability to kind of go longer and further and harder throughout the day. Again, here, some great pictures from the Mountain Project. And also, I know they're starting their ski training up here really soon. They have a great transition program. Kip, Colleen, and Mike over there really, really know how to get you in good shape and ready to go for those ridge laps, those long days in the backcountry. I just advise not maybe taking a fashion note from Matt here and, pick a little shirt that might be a little more appropriate to work out and get a little sweaty and maybe not your go-to work shirt.
Button down plaid shirt. That's pretty good. It does look like it's restricting his ability to get deep on that squat though. Like it's at 30 degrees in reflection.
I will say though, if anybody wants a good challenge, they should go out on a little tour with Matt, and he'll definitely put you in your right place. So I'll give him that, Jack. The big thing though is going to be after we do all this good training, developing that armor strength, or going out for our big days in the backcountry, or even these early season days where we're starting to ramp up that workload, where we really need to just make sure we recover from those days. So restoring that capacity of our muscles, our tissue, our performance ability. And the three big kind of keys to do that are hydrating, refueling, and sleeping. So pretty much how do we moderate all the other stressors on the body besides our activities to make sure that our activity can have the biggest outcome from that stress we put on it. So the first big one is going to be that restoring that capacity with hydration. Now, PBR or water in the Midwest, as we like to call it, is a great way to recover from that. It usually takes 24 hours to recover from dehydration. We like to recommend 3 to 4 liters of water per day. Obviously, if you're working out a little longer, depending on the temperature, the weather, the extent of a sweater you are, that might vary person to person. But the big thing really is to make sure we're hydrating early and often, especially for those long days. If we're starting to drink when we get thirsty on those long days, it's already too late. Now, in like training cycles or workouts, drinking to thirst is just fine. Not worrying about that later, longer on duration, in fact, is okay. A good rule of thumb is about 16 to 24 ounces for every pound lost during a training session or out on a big day. So that's 3 or 4 8-ounce curls, depending upon how you're taking them down. And the big key is for those big long days is to potentially getting some electrolytes, some carbs involved in that recovery part of it. A good way to monitor hydration or dehydration levels though is just the old and simple fast rule of kind of paying attention to your pee, that using that color scheme, that spectrum, to really let yourself know how your body's internalizing that hydration level is a good level to kind of gauge it on. Secondly is going to be refueling. So we're out there, it's cold, so we're burning more calories as it is. We're working hard, so we're also ramping up our metabolic levels, and we're just getting out there, getting going. And the big key here is after those big training days, we want to make sure we eat within that 60-minute window after those hard efforts. That's kind of that magic window to get everything back in place. Our body's more absorptive to it, more receptionate to those key nutrients. And either after those workouts or during those training days or out at the trailhead or after a skinning session, it's that 55-25-20 rule. So that 55% or 55 carbs, 25 protein, and 20 fat.
Healthy fat.
Healthy fat, yeah. So getting that key snack in either after that session, can be kind of during that session if it's going to be a big, long, hard day that we'd like to see more carbs, especially if the intensity level's up. But making sure that there's something in the car for the drive home to kind of get your body on that right path going down that. I kind of like to have people to keep it simple. I like to tell them to eat early, eat often, and eat real foods. So eat early during this session, eat often during as you're going so that you're not getting hungry. And then most specifically for afterwards is eating real foods to give our body really what it needs. And the other big thing here to help us restore capacity and moderate those training loads is sleep. It's a great quote from Matthew Walker here, who's got a really good book out on sleep, is sleep. It's the greatest performance enhancing drug no one is using. We have kind of a really long-standing joke in the town I used to live in, Flagstaff, is that the professional athletes or the runners in town are really good runners, but they're even better nappers. Then it's that kind of letting our body calm down, getting that good recovery in, and getting that good restoration in. And a couple of good habits or tips to get working on that sleep as recovery is trying to get 7 or more hours of sleep per night, avoiding any kind of alcohol, stimulants, high sugary foods before bed, something that will kind of interrupt that ability to fall asleep or stay or get a good quality sleep. And then one of the other key things is keeping a consistent sleep schedule. So making sure we're waking up relatively and going to bed at relatively the same times throughout the day. Even if we're not getting a whole lot of sleep, that consistency in that sleep schedule has been shown to have really good effects with recovery, pain, injuries, and keeping everything healthy along those lines.
Yeah, so sleep quality is definitely more important than sleep quantity, but it doesn't mean that you should just focus on getting 2 hours of quality sleep. The quantity definitely is important too, but we really do want to focus on that quality sleep. So taking those tips that AJ just talked about.
Yeah. And again, if you're having trouble sleeping, it's a really good thing to make sure we can kind of get it looked at, look into these habits, start to modify them, or seek help if it becomes a big enough issue. Well, that concludes our seasonal transition for skiing in working into the winter sports. A big thanks to Uphill Pursuits. Again, they have a lot of great outdoor and community recreation exposure and community engagement going on. If you have any questions or anything like that, by all means, drop Jason and I an email or answer questions on the bottom of the YouTube page here. We'll be checking that early and often. Or stay tuned with us on all other social media outlets as we continue to post tips, training recommendations, and things to work on or look out for as the season comes up.
Yeah, thanks. And if you're dealing with any nagging issues right now, it's the time to get after it. So drop us a line and come in if need be. But let's take care of that now and not have to worry about it later in the season.
Cool. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Have a good winter.